Jaqui Lane, founder of the Book Project and outstanding Australian businesswoman, and she joins us now. Jack, welcome to the show. Is there a
Thank you,
perfect
Michael.
country? Is there a perfect country, Jack? Have you found one?
I, well, no, I don't think there's a perfect one, but given the global environment right now, I think Australia and New Zealand are looking pretty good.
Yeah, well, you say that, Jack, but off your eastern coast, you've got a whole series of armed individuals who are probably more armed than, oh, I don't know, you've ever seen before. The Chinese going a bit of a live firing. This has caused a bit of, over here, I mean, we've talked about it, but I have to say we're not too worried about it because it's not really happening off our coast, it's happening off yours. What's the thoughts? What's been the reaction in Australia?
I think a couple of things. I think sort of people who are aware about it are a bit kind of surprised, not shocked, but surprised. Um, and typically for Australia, the focus is now focused on Albanese, who's managed to tangle himself up in a war of words as to when he knew about it and what the ADF, the Australian Defence Force, knew about it and when. It appears that an alert Virgin pilot actually saw what was going on and contacted the Defence Force. So our own Defence Force kind of didn't even know about it until a commercial flight pilot alerted them. And then, so now the debate's come around Albanese, when he knew, what he did, what he didn't do. So it's, so the fact of it happening, I think, has been again lost in the political spin, sadly. And then just to put another spanner in the wheel, a practice torpedo washed up on a Gold Coast beach a couple of days ago. So obviously our Defence Force were doing some practicing somewhere and lost a play torpedo. It's
Yeah.
quite funny.
Now, tell me about, though, is it important to know when the Prime Minister knew? I have to be honest with you. If three naval ships from the China, and potentially now we know that, there is a suspicion there might be a submarine as well, came down and sailed along the east coast and into
Yes.
in or around your exclusive economic zone in Australia, you would expect, would you not, the Australians to know, and then you'd be following them and shadowing them because, well, frankly, that's what you do, isn't it?
Yes, I think, we certainly knew that they were there because we were getting daily updates. They were off the coast of up Newcastle, and then the next we heard they were down off Eden, which is the south coast. And then they kind of played around in international waters. And I think the issue around the international waters thing was that they were doing live fire drills, whereas prior to that, they were just cruising up and down the coast, perhaps looking for a spot to stop. I don't know. But the issue was around the live fire drills over commercial airspace, which is pretty serious one way or the other, and the lack of being informed prior to that, because apparently international protocol is if you're in international waters and you're going to undertake live fire exercises, you inform the countries thereby what you're doing so they can divert commercial aircraft,
I
which have
was,
to
which
divert,
is yes, which
divert
is
on
what
their own.
Winston Peters, our Foreign Affairs Minister, and yours has been saying. I see on the periphery of a couple of bilaterals with Chinese counterparts over the last wee while. Listen, one of the things, context I didn't get from the New Zealand media though on this one, I don't know, it might be in Australia, is that really in many ways this is China reacting to Australia, the US, Canada, the Netherlands, Philippines, not so much New Zealand, who have been challenging China over the South China Sea. So, in other words, over freedom to navigation, and that China claims a good chunk of the South China Seas as its own. Those countries I've just mentioned don't, including Australia. They've sailed ships up there to sort of reassert that this is international water, not Chinese water, and that this is a bit of a tit for tat. Is that also being explained in Australia?
Yes, in a way, it doesn't need to be explained because that's been the case for some time now. So that's absolutely correct, and an ongoing issue. And I actually think it might have more to relate to the fact that Trump's buddying up with Putin. So China's just letting everybody know that, it's not forgetting about Taiwan. And if you think that China's forgot about that or isn't active, guess what? We can park off your coast. And so I think it's a bit of an escalation, not a major one. I think it's just saying we're not going anywhere, and you want to contest with us? Fine, we'll come and party in your part of the world.
Yeah, well, on February 6th, 7th of this month, the US Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, and the Royal Navy from Britain joined together on an exercise, combined operations in the South China Sea. So
Yeah.
you just have to see this as all part of the quid pro quo, but it's not been well described, or I have to say in the New Zealand media at all, that one would see that as happening. I also heard the Sydney Morning Herald last night. God, I don't often do this, but I'm alone. I'm home alone this weekend, Jack. Wife's gone off to a baby shower. The kids have all left home, which I explained to you last week. So I'm home alone. I'm desperate for entertainment.
Well, you've got the cat, haven't you?
Oh, and the dog, yeah. But there's only so much conversation you can have with them before it does tend to get a bit repetitive, I have to say, Jack. But as you probably know with your cat. No, so last night I listened to a Sydney Morning Herald podcast to do with this particular issue, and I think the chief political reporter or the strategy reporter for the Sydney Morning Herald was making the point that really Australia is stuffed, because although it might like to complain about these sort of activities in the future, it is so thoroughly dependent and its economy is so completely interwoven with that of the Chinese that he really does question how much independence Australia has strategically. Now, that was his view. What's yours?
I tend to agree with him. I mean, the bulk of our resources, which underpins the economy, go to China, which is why there's always this delicate dance with the Chinese, because our standard of living largely depends on it. Several years ago under the last coalition government, there was a deep freeze because the last government kind of stood up to the Chinese a bit, and they said, right, well, we're not going to import any wine, we're going to cut down our coal and this, and you can just sit there and, cop it until we're ready to, meat exports the lot. So it has taken the current Labor government 3 years or so to actually thaw that relationship, and it is vital to Australia. So the commentator, I think, is pretty bang on. It's a very uncomfortable truth, but it is what it is.
Well, actually, this sort of segues into the next issue, because this is sort of an issue related to the election. And we're sort of in the phony war, aren't we, at the moment? Because the election date, hasn't been announced yet?
Not yet. Not yet.
So,
Labor Albanese's going around the country throwing billions of dollars around because he's still in government, because as soon as he calls the election, he can't do that. But basically, we're in pre-election mode, which is ridiculous. The thinking now is that he'll call it in the next week or so, and we'll have it after the WA election, which is, I think, the 8th of March. So the date is firming for around about the 12th of April. But, really just give us all a break and call it, and let's get on with it.
yes, because you've raised the issue that you think that the Australian Labor Party in Albanese might be vote stacking. And you've mentioned a mass citizenship ceremony in Sydney's West, where 12,000 people, which is a huge number, apparently have been granted Australian citizenship. Is there some suggestion that they have been unfairly favoured, or that they vote Labor, or what, Jack?
Well, Western Sydney, the area where probably the bulk of those people are living, or close to living, are Labor seats that Labor desperately wants to hold, and so I think there's not just my inclination, but I think it's pretty obvious. Why would you be rushing through the citizenship of 12,000 people in Western Sydney, which are Labor seats?
And so you've got to be a citizen of Australia, not a resident to vote, do you?
Correct. Which is
Oh,
actually
so that
one of
makes.
the reasons which is one of the reasons many decades ago now I became a citizen, because I'd been here for about 10 years, and I was employing people and paying my taxes, and I couldn't vote in
Oh,
New
I
Zealand
see.
because I've
So
been
that's
out.
different than New Zealand, where you
Yeah,
only got to be a resident.
yeah, well, and so my issue back then was that I'd been out of New Zealand too long to vote in New Zealand, and I couldn't vote here either. And being the political person that I was, that was really annoyed me. So I became an Australian citizen, but did not renounce my New Zealand citizenship. So I've got both.
Oh, I see. So you can be a joint citizen and still meet their standards for voting. Okay, that's fair enough.
Correct.